Working 9 to 5. What a way to make a living. Barely getting by. It's all taking and no giving. They just use your mind and never give you credit. It's enough to drive you crazy if you let it. Recognize that? Not my words, but Dolly Parton's in that famous song from 44 years ago, released on the 19th of December 1980. How true those words have become for Kenyan laborers today. From doctors to lecturers, the cases of labor unrest in this country show no sign of letting up. And when we can't seem to handle the labor issues, we simply export them. Just what are the issues in this sector and what will it take to resolve them? Tonight, we analyze the very heavy in-tray for CS Alfred Mutua. In politics, it was a rousing welcome in Kondele with talk of reunion, while now Kenya was signing divorce papers. Politics as usual. On Sam Sense tonight, Sam reminds the members of parliament that their constituent is not the one who resides in State House. On Jamila's memo, a politician walked a mile in our shoes, literally. On My Take tonight, I hereby declare the News Gang officially launched. The News Gang that turns 6 years this month is hereby launched.
We are asking all the medical doctor interns across the country, in all the facilities, to stay at home immediately for the nationwide strike of all the doctors. We have the SDC or Special Delegate Conference, which then will determine whether we're going for 7 days or 14 days, or at most 21 days. But I believe because of the urgency of the matter and the frustrations that there is there with the doctors across the entire country, we may not go beyond 14 days.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. The hashtag is NewsGang at Citizen TV Kenya and at our respective handles. Here we are again, another strike by the doctors looming. Just what, second strike in 2 months, Jamila? Here we are again.
Remember, Yvonne, we had the strike that lasted 56 days in May. And there was a return to work formula that was signed and included among other things about the basic salaries for doctors, harmonization of their salary scales, and it also included payments for interns. Remember, that was a very big bone of contention. But then now, as we say, strike inanukia, kama wanavyosema kwa Kiswahili, the issue also of interns being asked to withdraw their services today. That was from the KMPDU. And they said themselves as doctors are going to issue a strike notice. I think they have a national meeting of KMPDU at some point, maybe this month or early next month. And then they're going to decide when their strike is going to be. And they'll give a strike notice. But as for the interns, they've asked them waondoe huduma zao kutoka hospitali. And I think maybe we should listen to one of the reasons why they were asking interns to down their tools.
This now brings a total number of 2 interns who we've lost in 2 months under the same similar circumstances. I'm also aware of 5 other interns who have attempted suicide. Unfortunately, were rescued and hospitalized.
And that is the sad story of one of their own, Dr. Francis Njuki, who's 29 years old, who was until his demise a pharmacist at the Thika Level 5 hospital. His body was unfortunately discovered hanging from the roof of his rented house in Kiganjo Estate. And they're saying until his death, he suffered a similar fate to those of his demonstrating colleagues, like the ones we are seeing in the story there, where they were working without pay for almost 4 months. The Doctors Union was saying his death is just one of many such cases and attempted suicides by the doctors. In September, of course, there was the unfortunate case of another intern, Dr. Desiree Mora, who also committed suicide. And Yvonne, you know, we've talked about this issue before. I remember in May when the strike was on, about how important the interns are. Yeah. I remember they were belittled by a CS, and we talked about how these are ladies and gentlemen who have actually attained 2 degrees. One is a Bachelor of Medicine and the Bachelor of Surgery. They've had training of a minimum of 6 years. After that, they've been assessed by senior doctors and external examiners, and they seem to be fit, and they're certified and competent enough to practice as medical doctors. They're then posted by the Ministry of Health to either government hospitals, faith-based ones, or large private hospitals. Remember, these young ladies and gentlemen, the interns, are licensed by the Kenya Practitioners and Dentist Council to practice medicine in those institutions that they are being posted to. And then they are supposed to be able to have the license from day one.
Yeah.
So there is no employment. You will not be posted anywhere if you do not have this license to practice as a medical doctor for the duration of this internship, which is usually 1 year. So they are recognized by all the necessary regulatory bodies. Come on, these are people who are licensed to practice medicine.
Right.
And then they talk to you about how that 1 year, they have the rotations where they're at hospitals. Sometimes they find themselves, wao ndo pekee wako hapo kuona wagonjwa. It's not like they always have a supervisor. Supervisor anakuja mara moja moja just to see how they are doing.
Right.
But they're the ones who directly deal with patients. They're the ones who diagnose. They're the ones ambao wanaandika madawa. They're the ones who have 48-hour shifts. I remember when I was talking to one of them and he said, umelala tu hivi kidogo, ushaitwa, rudi. And that's the kind of life they live. And when they ask for what is rightfully theirs, I think it's only fair that we give it to them. 6 years in school plus another year.
Right.
And then license to be able to practice medicine. I think this is an issue that is too important to be ignored or postponed, or agreements are signed, mnaahidiwa, and then ahadi hazitimizwi.
And you know, that's a sad bit about it, because the collective bargaining agreement, which was at the heart of this, had actually recommended a pay of 206,000 shillings for the intern doctors. And then, you know, when they signed the return to work formula, I think it was 70,000 shillings. But even that, there's been a deadlock over that, been surviving on no money, as you know, both sides of this divide are locking horns over how much intern doctors should be paid based on this 2017 collective bargaining agreement. Money is important, but it is also the conditions under which they work. For instance, the doctor who is sadly said to have taken his life just 2 days ago, they're complaining of long working hours. 36 hours. Yes, we understand that certain professions require that of you, but you can imagine 36 hours, no pay. The other thing is also the conditions under which you work, in terms of even the equipment that is available to them, the drugs, you know, what they need to actually do their job. For years in this country, you've heard of doctors, particularly in public service, who have complained of having to play God in many instances, where you've got 2, 3, 4, several critical patients, but either the medical equipment, the medicines that are required aren't enough, and they have to make a choice between one and the other. It's a difficult way to work, and that definitely takes a toll on the mind. But yet here we are again, you know, just 2 months later, with again this same issue.
And it's very unfortunate not knowing that during those negotiations for the return to work formula, there were two positions, like you said, 206,000 shillings, which was in the CBA earlier negotiated. But now the doctors went back to work, leaving that issue of how much allowance should interns be paid unresolved, because it was subject to some court cases. And on the 31st of October, that's when a decision was given by the High Court, indeed agreeing with the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, capping the allowances or the stipend for medical or health worker interns at 70,000, and talking about the financial constraints, and also to ensure that there's not so much disparity when it comes to interns in the public sector. But then again, that is 31st. Today is 28th of November, just about 4 weeks since that decision was given. But during that time, even as the medical doctors went back to work, and you remember, during those days, medical interns were being invited to go and collect letters, and they were refusing to do so. But as soon there appeared to be a bit of a solution coming on board, then medical interns were able to be posted. But you can imagine going to work every day and you don't know, first, how much you're supposed to be paid, and secondly, nothing is coming to really, for you to manage your life, really. You've been in school, like you say, for 6 years, but remember there was a delay in posting them, partly because of the challenges of the backlog that was, but also the dispute that was between the healthcare workers and the Ministry of Health. Then eventually, when you get a job to be posted, money is not coming in. I mean, I don't know if you can never work without a salary, but well, unfortunately, the doctors have had to be subjected to that. And I think there was an announcement sometime in August by the principal secretary in charge of Health, Public Health, and I think Professional Matters at the ministry, that is Mary Muthoni, who had promised that about 1.75 billion shillings would be released to go to meet the arrears that had been accrued by the medical interns. Now, whether that happened is a question that we need to investigate, because if it did not, then it's a waste of time for these medical interns. Remember, for you to thrive or to survive in whatever you're doing, and for you to keep waiting after school 6 years plus a break of about a year, there are some that were saying, including recently we saw some students saying that they've been at Moi University for a whole 9 years. And all this is happening in the health sector, because remember, majority of public hospitals are managed by the medical interns.
Yes.
At a time that you're unveiling universal health coverage, I mean, the component of healthcare professionals is too important. It is too critical, because this is what is going to ensure that majority of the patients do not move from a primary healthcare service provider to the highest level of care that can be found in this country, that is the referral hospital. So if you do not have the healthcare providers at all these levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, especially 3 and 4, which deal with much of these challenges that the population is facing, and that's why you'll find medical interns, level 4 and 5, and a bit of 3, if they're not satisfied for them to attend to those challenges that the people are facing, what then do you expect? Do you expect the universal health coverage to work? Do you expect the Social Health Authority to manage to run these hospitals? Because even if you pump in money, even if you collect money, contributions from employees, and of course the contributions from the non-employed or non-formally employed persons, money cannot treat. It is healthcare workers that are going to treat. So even as we continue talking about the working conditions, there has to be a proper conversation. I was speaking recently to a specialist who was saying that the Social Health Authority and the arrangement therein does not recognize the place of healthcare specialists. You know why? Because even when you talk about management of chronic illnesses, for instance, diabetes, how much money is allocated there for, say, monitoring of sugar? HbA1c, which is a test that you use to see how well a patient is managing the sugar control. It is just about 4,000 shillings per year per household. How much can that do? If you have to go to a lab and conduct that test, then it may only assure you of one test if you have to go to a proper laboratory. So there's a challenge here. And one can only hope that the authorities that are involved, whether it's the Ministry of Health or the government itself, and the advisors that advise both institutions of the ministry and the head of state's office, you can only hope that this information is within them to make the right decision, which is let the healthcare professionals manage to do what they need to do to grow in their careers, but also to serve the people.
And as you talk about listening and advising, and what you said about diabetes and specialists and how much money was set aside for it in this new health insurance fund, we mentioned even how we were wondering how they could have set aside only, I think, about 3,000 shillings for hypertension. We talked about even the optical, talked about the dental, and we're asking ourselves who really advised them to set those caps, because they don't really make sense in the grand scheme of things like kwa ground mambo ni tofauti. But then Gituku, as we prepare to listen to what the PS Harry Kimtai said today, because it was before the Public Accounts Committee and the issue of 70,000 shillings came, I think it's also a matter of your trust being broken so many times that even for the interns, they will not really believe it until they see it. Because that's why after all these months, they've still not been paid because of the push and pull about how much money they're supposed to get. I think let's listen to the PS and then we continue.
Upon the unions to let us pay the 70,000 to the interns to alleviate the suffering of the interns. But there are those who do not have any contentions, especially the clinical officers and the nursing. So it's only the pharmacists, the pharmacists, the doctors, the MOH doctors who have not accepted.
But all those officials did down their tools. Remember, during the 56-day one, clinical officers joined, the lab assistants joined, the interns themselves, the doctors, and we saw what it did to the country. But as you were talking about how the government has rolled out SHA, and they keep going on and on about there's no going back with this, it's what we will end up having. The least they can do is make sure that they have the personnel in place. so that they're able to actually give these services that people need. Because even every other day we hear about mapungufu ya SHA, how it's not working. Sasa hawa interns wamejiondoa, and they're the ones who are there kwa ground, who are supposed to be implementing this. What does this mean actually for the health care of people, especially in places that they really, really need it?
Not a very good look in terms of what's happening in the healthcare sector, but folks, it would seem it is looking rather grim. If you take a look at the intern doctors, but also where the intern doctors end up being trained or start off being trained, and that is at the universities. The labor issues in this country continue. You move from health sector to education, and we've just come out of a close to 1 month strike by university lecturers. Let's listen to the UASU calling off that strike.
Staff Union is convinced that the government has ceded to what we wanted. I therefore officially call off the strike that started on 29th October 2024.
The government has committed to ensure that what figures have been provided for in the CBA are implemented in the next 3 years.
Okay, here again, yet another talk of a CBA being implemented, a return to work formula. Perhaps, Sam, we need to really readjust these words or what they mean. CBAs are at the heart of much of, the labor unrest in this country.
Right.
And they always seem so confident when they're calling off the strike to say, yeah, we believe what has been put in the CBA will be honored. And then again, as usual, and understandably so, because, of budgets, this will be implemented over the next 3 years and there will be a phase. And then we get right back there, 6 months, maybe a year after, they didn't honor this part of the CBA. I mean, is this really collective bargaining in that sense of the word? Because it would often seem like it's saying a little something here that just gets people back into work. So here we are again. It was slightly less than a month, but close to it. University students, again, in disarray while watching their lecturers demanding what they feel is due to them?
Again, big problem, because you now need to start asking yourself, what does return to work formula mean? So return to work aside, what does that formula mean? Mm-hmm. Because in mathematics, a formula is something that is used to solve a problem.
And it leads to an answer.
There is an answer. And when you give that answer, it's actually supposed to be assessed and marks awarded. Yeah. Now, there has been so many return to work formulae that you even wonder, so what was the problem? What was the answer? Yeah. What was the assessment? Because this particular one that is a repeat strike in the year, and it's coming at a time that, remember the start of this academic term, the one that just ended for basic education, early August. Remember there was a strike by the two unions, NAT and KUPPET. Never mind that NAT pulled out earlier. But they stayed on, and one of the grievances was employment of JSS teachers, conversion from intern to employment or permanent and pensionable, which a commitment was made. But then over time, you come to realize that that commitment will be implemented in January 2025. Again, a promise. We don't know whether that will happen. And the excuse is that there are no resources to implement that. So now the lecturers have signed a document worth 9.7 billion shillings, spread out in 3 phases. The first phase, I think, is about 4.3 billion shillings to be implemented by June next year. Will that happen? Because remember, I just read a statement here, or rather referred to what happened in August. The Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Health, Mary Muthoni, announcing that there would be release of some 1.75 billion shillings to go to paying the arrears of medical interns. Last week, when the President spoke at the National Assembly, he said that there are some billions of shillings that are going to be released to go to the hospitals in debts owed to hospitals from the NHIF. And of course, they're also saying that all commitments that were made in the month of October during the rollout of the Social Health Authority /SHIF were going to be paid last week and this week. How much of that has happened? Because if a government cannot keep its word without any explanation, then what are the subject of that commitment supposed to do? Remember, at the fall of the Finance Bill of 2024, an announcement was made that there was going to be austerity measures, that the government was going to cut on costs. Part of the cost was that all pay reviews or pay increments was going to be frozen. And you may recall that immediately, or a few days later, we had the Salaries and Remuneration Commission publishing a notice saying that after consultation with the National Treasury, all increments have been frozen.
Yeah.
These are increments that were due to state officers, including the president and the deputy, then deputy, who had opted that they didn't want an increment, cabinet secretaries and the other state officers within the executive. At the same time, members of the public service or workers in the public service sector were also supposed to be given a raise, but it was frozen. But around that time, if you may recall, there were increments for the officers in the National Police Service and the prisons. And it was explained that they needed that to stay motivated and also to show them that the government cares. So there's a freeze. The police and the officers in the prisons department are given a raise. The other workers, of course, will demand for what's rightfully theirs. And that's where the doctors come in, that's where the teachers come in, that's where the academic staff of universities come in. Now, if this is not going to be respected, then it appears there's no value of even engaging in some of these conversations. And one wonders then, what are you supposed to do? Because Constantine Wesonga, whom we've seen for many years, crying for the rights of the workers in the academic sector, university academic sector, may not be taken seriously eventually, because if you keep signing but things are not implemented, the membership is going to raise questions. And you recall that recently, when Kupet at the national office called off the strike, there were officers from different counties that were raising questions. So even as this happened, remember there was another commitment that was made just this year and not long ago at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, when the Association of Kenya Aviation Workers Union were being met by the cabinet secretary about Adani. And they were given some 10 days in a statement that was read by Francis Atoli, the Secretary General of KOTU. And the commitment was that within 10 days they were going to read the documents of Adani to measure if they are satisfied with what is contained in there. And after that, they are going to be involved and they are going to agree and sign documentation and what have you. Well, eventually, KAWU came and rejected that document and said doesn't represent their best interest. Where are we now? Adani is gone. The deal is gone. The workers remain. Have their grievances been addressed beyond that particular amount of JKI?
Not at all. Yvonne, sorry, something Ituku said, if I may. You talked about CBAs. And the Minister for Education, actually the CS for Education, Julius Migos, talked about CBAs when they were signing the deal with the university, with WASU. Let's hear what he said.
Unions in the sector will be negotiating their CBAs at the beginning of their cycle and not at the end, so that we can be able to budget for these resources.
We should also prepare to arrange with the university management and senate to cover the time lost, so that the students can get quality education.
He talked about CBAs at the beginning. I don't know. I mean, past CBAs.
This CBAs 2021-2025?
Yes.
So where are we now? At the start or at the end?
Good question.
It's supposed to be implemented.
It should have been implemented.
It should have been, yes, at the tail end of that.
2024. In fact, you should need to be signing a new one next year.
Right. Yeah. In fact, the talks usually of that begin, before one concludes, to start to see what happens with the next. But here's the cycle in this country with labor unrest. Be it teachers, doctors, academic staff union at the universities, aviation workers, is, the workers will start a series of meetings and issue a series of notices that, hey, there's a problem here, we're not feeling appreciated, there's a deal that's been, in the offing, not being honored by government. And then they issue the 21-day strike notice, and then they go on strike. And then the Labour and Employment Court declares the strike illegal and asks them to go back to the table and for talks. And then they start talking about the CBA. And then there will be days, sometimes weeks, of stalled talks. And usually tough talk on either side. Government might dismiss these ones and say, you know, but even us, we were interns and we were never paid and that sort of thing. And then what happens? Finally, you know, light at the end of the tunnel, they come back and they say, we've called off the strike. And these are the statements you're likely to hear. You can tell the story. One, that there will be no victimization of those who took part in the strike. There's a CBA that has been agreed upon. Within the first 10 days, we're going to release the first tranche, and then the rest of it will be done within the next 90 days. Repeat. And we are here constantly. This is the cycle. Whether you're a journalist or not, I guarantee you, you are able to write this story blindfolded. You know, this is the same cycle we go through. And so therefore, are we solving anything? One, are we giving promises that we know we truly cannot keep when you take a look at where budgets are, revenue, and all the other obligations that we have? Is it about time that in those CBA talks, you have some really honest conversations? We don't have this, because it looks like that return to work formula is usually something that'll, and then they go to State House and they take all these beautiful photos and then they post them on social media, like we saw happening with the doctors, and there was all this excitement that yes, now you know, we're back to work, and here we are again 2 months later. There needs to, this is becoming quickly a farce. But the question is, at what point does this cycle, what happens if the laborers now realize, okay, hii ni mchezo wa town. Yeah.
And there's a bigger problem.
And then you have a bigger problem on your hands.
Who are the subjects of this?
Exactly.
You have the students.
Exactly.
Lost learning hours.
And in all of that, patients who are unable to access services.
Passengers.
Yeah.
Some traveling to go and attend important gatherings, and they need to travel early for accreditation. I mean,
and the gentleman from UWASU was talking about how they're going to try and make up. I mean, there's some first year students ambao hawajakanyaga darasani. This is November. Usually by now mna prepare for exams, ndo semester ya kwanza imeisha. So how are you going to do this? Are you going to extend the time? Are you going to give them extra classes? How are you going to make up for the fact that for almost 3 months fees imelipwa na hawajasoma? There has to be a plan for now making up for the lost time.
Yeah, and there needs to be some thought, and maybe we'll come back and just wind up a little bit on that, because while we have, you know, a myriad of problems here, we're saying, okay, we can export our labor, but even there, again, you know, that's been halted for a bit. So let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll finish up on that and just see, you know, what's happening within the labor ministry. And there were jobs that were announced for meant for those outside the country, made for people to go outside the country and find work. But that's on hold or paused or halted or whatever that word is. We'll come back and talk about that here on Newsgang.